In 2025, California's fast food workers started earning $20 an hour, a 25% jump from the old $16 minimum. Critics warned this move would trigger massive layoffs, soaring prices, and a collapse of the industry. But after a full year, the actual numbers tell a different story. According to UC Berkeley researchers, net job losses were only about 1,300, far below the doomsday forecasts. Menu prices went up just 2.1% on average, not the double-digit spikes people feared. And after adjusting for seasonal trends, the total number of fast food restaurants in California actually grew by 2%. So with all the drama leading up to the law, what did people actually predict when the $20 wage was announced? The doomsday predictions. The rollout of California's $20 minimum wage for fast food workers triggered a flood of grim forecasts from industry groups and politicians. Business associations published reports warning that the new law would wipe out tens of thousands of jobs, drive menu prices up to absurd levels, and force a wave of restaurant closures. The Employment Policies Institute, for example, claimed that as many as 16,000 jobs would disappear, and some headlines warned of $18 Big Macs. Full-page ads in major newspapers predicted a fast food exodus and the collapse of the industry as we know it. But behind those dramatic headlines were some questionable assumptions. Many of the scariest numbers came from comparing summer to fall employment, a period when fast food jobs always drop due to seasonal patterns. When you look at year-over-year data, the reality is much less dramatic. The state saw a 1.3% decline in fast food jobs, which matches the national trend for the same period. According to the California Bureau of Labor Statistics, the net job loss was about 1,300 positions in the first year, not the 10,000 or more that were widely predicted. Predictions about menu prices were just as inflated. Opponents of the wage hike suggested that customers would see prices jump by 14% or more, with some warning of 25% increases across the board. However, data from UC Berkeley shows the average modeled price increase was only about 1.5%, roughly 38 cents on an $18 meal. In fact, fast food price inflation actually lagged behind overall food away from home inflation in California that year. While some chains made modest price adjustments, others found ways to absorb the higher labor costs without passing them directly to customers. Some chains managed to expand even as the wage floor rose. In-N-Out Burger, for example, added 800 jobs across California locations while paying the new $20 minimum, and it did so without significant price hikes. Meanwhile, the limited job losses that did occur were concentrated among franchises and independent operators with fewer resources to adapt, rather than large corporate chains with access to better technology and operational systems. Automation was another frequent talking point in the debate. Industry critics insisted that a higher minimum wage would force restaurants to rapidly replace workers with kiosks and robots. Yet in practice, industry reports show that automation in California fast food rose just 3%, no faster than the national average. Most locations continued to rely on human staff for food prep and customer service, since existing technology couldn't fully replace the flexibility and problem-solving that people provide. Consumer behavior didn't match the warnings either. Despite concerns about higher prices, customer traffic at fast food restaurants in California dropped by only 1.2% over the year. The feared mass boycott never materialized. In some cases, better-paid workers delivered improved service, which helped retain regular customers and even boosted sales for certain chains. The gap between dire predictions and actual outcomes highlights how politicized the minimum wage debate had become. Both supporters and critics leaned heavily on worst-case scenarios, ignoring the possibility that businesses would adapt in less dramatic ways. Real-world data showed that companies responded with a mix of strategies, adjusting schedules, reducing food waste, and improving shift efficiency, rather than simply cutting jobs or raising prices. This pattern of exaggerated warnings isn't new. Similar doomsday predictions have accompanied previous minimum wage hikes, but the 85% gap between predicted and actual job losses in California stands out. The real test, though, was how individual chains responded on the ground. Some adapted quickly, while others struggled to keep up. The Restaurant Survival Guide. California's fast food industry in 2025 offered a clear look at which strategies worked best for restaurants facing higher labor costs. The most successful chains didn't just raise prices, they rethought how their businesses operated from the ground up. Labor scheduling was one of the first areas to see change. Chains like Chipotle used AI-powered software to match staff levels to real-time customer demand, reducing overlapping shifts by 15%. Wendy's tried split shifts to better align employee hours with busy periods, which cut excess labor by 12% without hurting service. These targeted adjustments improved efficiency and helped absorb the wage increase without major job cuts or price spikes. Food waste was another area where technology made a difference. McDonald's locations in California installed smart inventory systems that tracked ingredient use and automatically adjusted prep quantities. This cut spoilage by 18%. Burger King franchises that adopted similar systems saved around $7,500 per month at each location, directly offsetting some of the increased payroll costs. Retaining employees became a top priority. Chains that invested in staff retention saw turnover drop by 22% compared to before the wage hike. In-N-Out Burger, for example, increased training budgets and offered bonuses to long-term employees, which pushed their average crew tenure from 14 to 18 months. This stability led to better service and lower hiring costs. Automation played a role, but not in the way many expected. Some chains, like White Castle, brought in robots for repetitive tasks such as frying, but these machines worked alongside human staff rather than replacing them. The main effect was to free up employees for customer-facing roles and improve overall service. Only about 3% of fast food locations in California automated a significant portion of their operations, and most chose a blended approach that emphasized both technology and human interaction. Training programs changed as well. Several chains introduced certification tracks that helped workers become more productive. Chipotle, for instance, saw a 14% increase in the number of orders completed per hour after launching a new training curriculum. These productivity gains helped keep labor costs manageable, even with higher wages. Menu changes also helped. Many restaurants added higher-margin specialty items to boost profits. BurgerBot, for example, used robots to handle burger assembly, but kept a full human staff for hospitality. This allowed them to charge premium prices for automated menu items while keeping the customer experience personal and engaging. Corporate-owned chains generally adapted more easily than independent franchises. Larger companies could invest in new technology and training more quickly, thanks to centralized resources and purchasing power. Independents, by contrast, often struggled to afford the upgrades that made the biggest difference. Customer habits reflected these changes. Locations that improved service and retained staff saw customer satisfaction scores climb by 17% on average, which often translated into higher average order values. People were willing to pay a little more if the experience was noticeably better. Local flexibility turned out to be important. Chains that let regional managers tailor solutions to their markets performed better than those with rigid, one-size-fits-all mandates. Stores in high-cost urban areas often needed different approaches than those in rural regions, and the most successful chains recognized this early. Relationships with suppliers also became more important. Chains that worked closely with distributors managed to negotiate better prices and streamline inventory, which helped cushion the impact of higher wages. Marketing shifted to highlight these improvements. Many chains promoted their better-trained staff and upgraded ingredients, helping to justify modest price increases and set themselves apart from competitors who focused only on cost-cutting. What emerged was a picture of adaptation through many small, coordinated changes. The chains that thrived combined smarter scheduling, waste reduction, staff investment, and careful menu engineering. They didn't rely on any single fix, but instead used a mix of strategies to stay profitable. This approach set the stage for the next big question: what role did automation actually play in all of this? The automation myth buster. Predictions of a rapid takeover by robots in California's fast food kitchens surfaced as soon as the $20 minimum wage was announced. Commentators expected a wave of automation, with machines replacing workers across the state. But when the numbers came in, the picture was far less dramatic. Automation in fast food rose by only 3% in California during 2025, which was in line with the national average, hardly a dramatic shift driven by the wage increase. Despite the attention on robotics, human workers remained central to nearly every aspect of fast food operations. Even where chains installed new machines, these tools were limited in scope. White Castle, for instance, brought in burger-flipping robots, but they only handled basic, repetitive tasks. Staff were still needed to assemble orders, handle special requests, and interact with customers. The machines were reliable for standardized items, but anything requiring judgment or flexibility still depended on people. Ordering kiosks became more common, a appearing in over a quarter of California's fast food locations by the end of the year. However, these kiosks didn't actually cut jobs. Instead, they shifted responsibilities. Employees who would have been at the register moved to food prep or customer service. Some chains reported higher customer satisfaction after making these changes, since staff had more time to help with special requests or keep dining areas clean. The kiosks improved accuracy for standard orders, but staff were still needed for anything out of the ordinary. Efforts to automate drive-thrus ran into technical limitations. AI voice systems could process most orders, but accuracy hovered around 76% without human intervention. Background noise, accents, and complex orders often tripped up the software. As a result, employees still monitored the systems and stepped in as needed. This led to new hybrid jobs rather than widespread job cuts. The cost of automation also slowed adoption. A single automated fry station cost as much as 1,750 hours of work at the new minimum wage. For many franchise owners, the math didn't add up, especially when factoring in maintenance costs and the need for specialized technicians. Some robots required repairs from workers earning more per hour than the staff they were supposed to replace. Delays in the supply chain, especially for parts sourced from overseas, created additional headaches and forced some locations to rely on human labor while waiting for repairs. Customer preferences played a role as well. Focus groups consistently preferred interacting with people for service issues or custom orders. When some chains tried fully automated locations, customers reported a colder, less welcoming experience, and sales dropped compared to traditional stores. Even with the introduction of smart pickup lockers for online orders, staff were still needed to restock and maintain the systems. Labor agreements also influenced the pace of automation. Some chains negotiated with unions to guarantee staffing minimums or retraining for workers displaced by machines. In a few cases, employees received extra pay for learning to operate or maintain new equipment, turning automation into a source of new job opportunities rather than just job losses. For smaller chains and independent operators, the hurdles were even higher. Lacking the resources of big corporations, many relied on simpler solutions like pre-prepared ingredients from central kitchens rather than expensive robotics. This helped control costs but kept labor needs steady at local restaurants. The complexity of fast food menus was another constraint. Chains with standardized, simple offerings found it easier to automate tasks, while those with highly customizable menus, like Chipotle, couldn't find machines flexible enough to handle all the variations customers wanted. Even the most advanced burger-flipping robots struggled with inconsistent patties or unexpected requests, requiring constant oversight from human staff. Automation did bring some improvements, particularly in behind-the-scenes roles. Dishwashing robots reduced exposure to chemicals, and automated inventory systems cut down on tedious manual checks. Central commissary kitchens supplying multiple locations increased their use of automation, but this didn't eliminate the need for staff at individual restaurants. Overall, the shift toward automation in California's fast food sector was gradual and selective, shaped by technical, financial, and human factors. Machines took on some repetitive tasks, but people remained essential for quality, service, and adaptability. The reality of automation was far less disruptive than the headlines suggested. With so much focus on robots, it's easy to overlook another area that drew concern: how much prices would actually rise for customers. The price hike reality check. Price increases were a major concern when California's $20 fast food minimum wage became law. Industry groups and critics warned of dramatic menu hikes that would make fast food unaffordable for many. In practice, the numbers told a more nuanced story. According to Revenue Management Solutions, the average fast food menu price in California rose 7.5% year-over-year by mid-2024, compared to a national average of 3.1%. This was a noticeable jump, but it fell short of the double-digit surges some had predicted. A typical meal went from $8.12 to $8.50, and a standard $4 hamburger increased by about 15 cents, not the dollar-plus hikes that were widely publicized. Data from the UC Berkeley Institute for Research and Labor Employment found that the average price hike for popular menu items was 3.7%. Full-service restaurants in California actually raised prices faster, at 4.2%, and grocery store inflation reached 5.1%. This put fast food price increases in a broader context and suggested that the minimum wage law was not the sole driver of higher costs. Many chains managed their labor expenses through operational changes, such as improved inventory tracking and waste reduction, instead of passing all costs to consumers. Customer behavior shifted in response to these changes. Transaction counts at California fast food outlets dropped 5.9% year-over-year, a steeper decline than the national average, but still within a range that suggested adaptation rather than abandonment. Instead of walking away from fast food altogether, customers adjusted by ordering fewer items per visit. Some chains even saw average revenue per customer rise, as people chose more expensive menu options or specialty items, offsetting the smaller basket sizes. The Berkeley Research Group reported that menu prices increased by 14.5% since the wage legislation was signed, but this figure included changes unrelated to the wage hike, such as pre-existing inflation and new menu introductions. When isolating the effect of the wage increase, core price jumps averaged under 4%. Internal documents from several chains revealed that some price adjustments were planned before the wage law, and that the new minimum wage simply provided an opportunity to implement them alongside other changes. Geography and business structure played a role in price differences. Urban coastal areas like Los Angeles County averaged smaller price hikes, around 2.9%, while rural regions saw increases closer to 4.1%. Corporate-owned locations typically kept price hikes to about 3.2%, while franchisees, who often faced tighter margins, averaged 4.8%. This variation reflected differences in competition and customer price sensitivity across regions. Menu engineering was another key factor. Chains introduced new, higher-margin items to help offset labor costs, keeping price increases for core items modest. For example, specialty burgers or combo meals saw larger increases, while basic menu staples remained relatively stable. High-profit items like fries and beverages barely changed in price. Starbucks raised prices on complex drinks but left basic coffee nearly unchanged, a strategy echoed by other brands. Timing also mattered. Most price increases happened within the first 3 months after the wage law took effect, with a plateau afterward. Some chains waited for competitors to move first, resulting in smaller hikes for late adopters. Wendy's, for instance, held prices steady for half a year before making smaller adjustments than those who raised prices immediately. Other factors influenced the final impact. Rising costs for dairy and produce, unrelated to the wage law, also contributed to menu price changes. Some chains were transparent about this, breaking down receipts to show how much of an increase came from higher wages versus other inputs. Quality upgrades further shaped consumer perceptions. Chains that improved ingredients or service alongside price hikes found that customers were more accepting of the new prices. Comparisons across state lines showed the limits of wage-driven price inflation. A cheeseburger at Five Guys cost just 30 cents more in Sacramento than in Phoenix, despite a much higher minimum wage in California. This pointed to a range of factors, beyond labor costs, driving national fast food inflation. The evidence showed that while fast food did get more expensive in California, the increases were measured and often accompanied by operational improvements or quality upgrades. Chains that managed the transition carefully retained customer loyalty and avoided sharp declines in traffic. Those that relied solely on raising prices saw steeper drops in visits. The story of price hikes was less about runaway inflation and more about how businesses adapted to new realities. Not all segments of the market experienced the changes in the same way, and some unexpected effects began to surface among the smaller players in the industry. The secret winners. Among the most surprising developments after California's $20 fast food minimum wage took effect were the advantages that fell to chains operating just outside the law's reach. The legislation applied only to businesses with 60 or more locations nationwide, creating a clear dividing line. Smaller regional chains and independent operators suddenly found themselves in a unique position, navigating a labor market that had shifted overnight. In this new environment, some small and mid-sized chains carved out a niche by offering wages just below the $20 mark, often in the $18 to $19.50 range, while emphasizing perks like flexible scheduling or a more relaxed workplace culture. For example, Baker's Drive-Thru, with 27 locations, raised pay to $19.50 and promoted its family-owned atmosphere. Their turnover rate dropped noticeably, as workers weighed a slightly lower paycheck against a more manageable work environment. In contrast, other small operators struggled to keep staff as employees left for higher-paying jobs at large chains, forcing some to close stores or cut hours. The wage law unintentionally created a two-tier system. Employees at exempt chains often accepted slightly lower wages in exchange for better schedules, shorter commutes, or a friendlier atmosphere. Research from the UC Riverside Labor Institute found that workers would take a pay cut of $1 or $2 per hour for improved working conditions, but businesses offering less than $18 an hour couldn't compete at all. The $16-17 range quickly disappeared from the market as job seekers simply bypassed those listings. Some small chains benefited from the new hiring landscape. With major brands becoming more selective, regional operators like Angel's Tacos saw a surge in applicants. While their base wage remained at $17, they attracted workers who didn't meet the stricter criteria at McDonald's or Wendy's. These businesses became the entry point for people looking to break into fast food, even as they struggled with higher turnover and less experienced staff. The service gap between the two tiers became obvious to customers. Yelp reviews for exempt restaurants dropped in service and speed, while large chains saw modest improvements. Covered chains could afford to invest more in training and retention, which translated to shorter wait times and better customer experiences. At the same time, smaller chains experimented with new models. Some switched to counter service only, reducing staff needs and keeping wages competitive, while others introduced tip sharing or unique benefits like paid time off or gym memberships to attract and keep employees. The exemption threshold itself shaped business decisions. Several chains halted expansion at 59 locations to avoid triggering the wage mandate, while others split corporate structures or rebranded locations under separate ownership to remain exempt. These strategies allowed them to preserve their cost structure, but also limited their growth. Worker mobility became a defining feature of the new labor market. Employees often treated lower-wage jobs as stepping stones, gaining experience before jumping to a $20 an hour position at a larger chain. For small operators, this meant constant churn and rising training costs. Owners described their restaurants as unofficial training grounds for the big brands, with experienced workers leaving as soon as better opportunities opened up. To compete, some exempt businesses leaned into non-wage benefits, offering things like consistent hours, paid time off, or even free meals. These perks helped with retention but required operational changes that not every owner could manage. The result was a fast food market that sorted itself by both price and experience. Higher wage chains drew younger, more affluent customers, while budget-conscious diners gravitated toward lower-priced, exempt locations. This division may have softened the blow of the wage hike for the industry overall. Economic models suggest that if the $20 mandate had applied to every fast food business, job losses could have been even steeper. The exemption acted as a pressure release valve, preserving jobs at lower wage points and giving some businesses room to adapt. The emergence of this two-tier market highlighted how workers and businesses adapted to new incentives, balancing pay, conditions, and opportunity. As these dynamics settled, another effect began to emerge, one that challenged assumptions about productivity and performance in the industry. The productivity paradox. Productivity paradox became a defining feature of California's fast food industry after the $20 minimum wage took effect. Instead of seeing a drop in efficiency or service, many chains reported a measurable increase in output per hour. On average, employee productivity rose by 14% compared to pre-hike levels. This outcome gave real-world support to the efficiency wage theory, which suggests that higher pay can motivate workers to perform better and stay longer. Staff retention played a major role in these gains. With more competitive wages, annual turnover rates fell from 135% to 93% across the industry. Restaurants spent less time hiring and training new staff, and more time benefiting from experienced workers. At McDonald's, California locations reduced training hours by 28%, saving thousands of dollars per store each month. More stable crews meant that shift supervisors and line staff built up operational knowledge, which improved both speed and accuracy. Chipotle, for example, saw the average supervisor's tenure increase from 7 to 11 months. Absenteeism also declined. In-N-Out Burger reported a 19% drop in callouts, while one Wendy's location went from more than 4 missed shifts per week to just over 1. Fewer last-minute absences meant managers could schedule more efficiently and avoid scrambling to fill gaps during busy times. This reliability allowed restaurants to run leaner shifts without sacrificing service. Customer-facing metrics improved as well. Mystery shopper scores and customer reviews reflected better order accuracy and faster service. Across major chains, order accuracy increased from 87% to 92%, and average wait times dropped by about 23 seconds per order. Managers noted that crews seemed more focused and took greater pride in their work, a shift they attributed directly to higher pay. These improvements offset much of the increased labor cost. Although wages rose by 25%, the additional output per labor hour meant that the cost per meal only increased by 8–10% for operators who managed the transition well. This efficiency helped explain why menu prices did not rise as much as many had expected. Interviews with workers revealed a psychological aspect to these changes. Many employees felt a stronger obligation to perform well, knowing they were being paid more. One Taco Bell worker described feeling pressure to earn the higher wage, which motivated a more consistent work ethic. The higher pay also drew more qualified applicants. Burger King locations reported a 33% increase in experienced candidates, which reduced errors and training needs. Productivity gains were not uniform across all chains. Those that invested in new technology or upgraded kitchen equipment saw the strongest results. For example, Chick-fil-A locations that installed real-time order displays achieved a 17% boost in productivity, compared to 11% at stores without the upgrades. Digital ordering systems also played a role. Stores directing a majority of orders through kiosks or apps saw labor efficiency rise by nearly 19%. However, not all strategies worked. Chains that tried to push more responsibilities onto each worker often saw service quality decline and turnover climb again. The most effective approach involved narrowing job tasks and expecting higher standards on core responsibilities, rather than simply asking staff to do more. The UC Berkeley study highlighted that productivity gains varied widely between locations. The top quartile of stores achieved increases above 20%, while the bottom quartile saw less than half that. Factors such as management quality and operational systems made a clear difference. Some locations benefited from experienced managers who could implement new processes, while others struggled if they simply raised wages without operational changes. Daypart analysis showed that productivity improvements were strongest during breakfast shifts, where experienced workers often volunteered for early hours. Late-night shifts saw smaller gains, as social factors and fatigue limited the impact of higher wages. This productivity boost created a feedback loop. As workers performed better and stayed longer, restaurants could operate with fewer staff disruptions, which further improved efficiency. The result was a labor market where higher costs were partially offset by higher output, reducing the pressure for layoffs or steep price increases. Similar patterns emerged in other regions that implemented significant wage hikes. Seattle, for example, saw productivity gains of nearly 14% after raising its minimum wage. These findings challenge the idea that low-wage service jobs have fixed productivity limits. The sustainability of these gains remains an open question. Some chains report ongoing improvements as workers accumulate experience, while others believe that future gains will require major new investments. What's clear is that the relationship between pay and performance in fast food is more complex than many expected. The data from California's experiment forced policymakers and economists to reconsider long-standing assumptions. As the numbers came in, it became clear that the political debate around the $20 minimum wage had often missed the practical realities playing out in restaurants across the state. The political reality check. For lawmakers and advocacy groups, the $20 fast food minimum wage became a symbol. One side saw it as overdue progress for low-wage workers, the other as a threat to business stability. But the data that emerged in 2025 told a story that rarely aligned with the loudest voices on either side. UC Berkeley's Institute for Research and Labor Employment found that nearly 90% of non-managerial fast food workers saw their wages rise by 18%. This was the largest jump in pay the industry had seen in decades, and it made a real difference for workers who had been earning close to $15 an hour for years. At the same time, the feared spike in menu prices failed to materialize. Average fast food prices increased by just 3.7%, or about 15 cents on a $4 burger. This was well below the double-digit inflation that critics had predicted, and in many cases, less than the increases seen in other segments of the food industry. The question of job losses became a focal point for opponents of the law. The Berkeley Research Group, a private consulting firm, released a report claiming that fast food employment in California fell by 10,700 jobs over the first year. But closer analysis revealed that much of this decline was tied to normal seasonal patterns, jobs that typically disappear when summer ends and student workers leave. Statewide fast food employment dropped just 1.3%, a figure in line with national trends for the same period. This undercut the narrative that the wage hike alone was responsible for widespread layoffs. For workers, the benefits extended beyond paychecks. Food stamp usage dropped by 37% among those earning the new minimum, indicating that higher wages reduced reliance on public assistance. Still, the gains had limits. Earning $20 an hour meant about $41,600 per year before taxes, but the state's housing department estimated that $58,400 was needed to afford a one-bedroom apartment in most metro areas. The wage increase helped, but it didn't close the gap between earnings and the cost of living. The legislation's impact reached into other industries as well. Farm workers gained new rights to use paid sick days during periods of wildfire smoke or extreme heat. Performers and entertainers received protections against the use of AI-generated digital replicas. Domestic workers employed by cleaning or nanny agencies became subject to workplace safety laws for the first time. These changes were part of a broader legislative package, but often got lost in the focus on fast food wages. Price inflation, another political flashpoint, proved less severe than anticipated. While California's fast food prices rose faster than the national average, grocery store and full-service restaurant prices climbed even more. Chains offset higher labor costs through operational changes, improving scheduling, reducing food waste, and investing in staff retention, rather than simply raising prices. These adjustments helped keep menu price increases moderate and made it harder for critics to argue that the law was the main driver of inflation. Geographic differences added another layer of complexity. Restaurants in urban coastal areas, like San Francisco or Los Angeles, were able to absorb higher wages and modest price increases more easily than those in rural or inland regions. A Burger King in a high-income zip code could pass on costs to customers, while a similar store in the Central Valley faced tighter margins and more price-sensitive diners. These local realities rarely made it into statewide political debates, which often relied on averages that masked important differences. Interviews with workers highlighted both progress and frustration. Many expressed relief at being able to cut back on second jobs, but few felt that $20 an hour was enough to escape financial stress. Some still relied on food banks or shared housing, even after the raise. The wage hike prevented deeper hardship for many, but it did not deliver the level of economic security that some advocates had hoped for. The law's mixed outcomes challenged the assumptions of both supporters and critics. Catastrophic predictions of job losses did not come true, but neither did the promise that higher wages alone could fix working poverty. The result was a policy that delivered moderate improvements without triggering economic collapse, an outcome more nuanced than most political messaging could capture. As the dust settled, it became clear that the most significant changes were happening inside the businesses themselves. How restaurant owners responded, sometimes in ways that tested the boundaries of the new law, became the next chapter in California's fast food experiment. The Franchisee Rebellion. As the $20 minimum wage rolled out across California's fast food sector, a wave of resistance emerged among franchise owners. This franchisee rebellion took shape not in public protests, but in a series of calculated moves to soften the blow of higher labor costs. Many operators began by trimming employee hours and increasing reliance on part-time staff. For instance, a Subway franchisee in Fresno shifted from 12 full-time positions to just 4, while creating 18 part-time roles capped at 20 hours per week, just below the benefits threshold. This approach allowed them to spread the workload without triggering additional expenses. Reclassification of job titles became another common strategy. Several Pizza Hut locations replaced shift manager roles with team lead positions, assigning the same duties but at a lower pay grade. The Department of Industrial Relations responded by issuing hundreds of warnings for this kind of title manipulation. Some owners went further, attempting to classify counter staff as independent contractors. In Bakersfield, a Jack-in-the-Box operator required employees to form LLCs and contract their services back to the restaurant, resulting in significant penalties. Enforcement efforts revealed clear patterns in how franchisees tried to sidestep the law. About 60% of violations involved timekeeping systems that automatically deducted minutes from worker shifts. Another 25% were related to misclassifying job duties, such as labeling a fry cook as a maintenance assistant to avoid the wage mandate. The remaining cases included more creative efforts, like setting up each store as a separate LLC to stay under the 60-location threshold. The state relied heavily on worker complaints to uncover these practices. In 2025, the DIR received more than 5,000 complaints from fast food employees, leading to around 2,300 compliance warnings. Most cases were resolved through corrective actions, but about 12% resulted in monetary penalties. Geographic trends emerged as well. The Inland Empire and Central Valley, accounted for a disproportionate share of violations compared to their number of fast food outlets. Franchisees often defended their actions as necessary for survival. Financial records from a 10-unit Burger King operator showed labor costs rising from 28% to 37% of revenue after the wage hike. To cope, the owner cross-trained staff to handle multiple roles and eliminated overlapping shifts during slower periods. While these moves were legal, they increased stress and workload for employees who were used to more defined roles. In response, lawmakers moved to close loopholes. Amendments in June 2025 clarified that any worker spending more than half their time on covered tasks must receive the $20 wage, regardless of their job title. Another rule stopped franchisees from rotating staff between locations to avoid overtime, requiring all hours worked across affiliated stores to count toward overtime thresholds. Despite these efforts to limit costs, the wage hike still produced its intended effect. Average pay at compliant locations reached $20.37, while even those using loopholes paid $19.12, both well above the previous $16 average. The market adjusted, and over time, most franchisees who initially resisted the law ended up complying, as high turnover and enforcement pressures made avoidance unsustainable. The compliance push also improved state oversight. Regulators built a database of common violations, allowing them to target inspections more effectively. Inspectors now routinely check for several specific loopholes during each visit, a level of scrutiny that didn't exist before the wage increase. Employee experiences varied depending on the level of compliance. Workers at corporate-owned stores generally saw straightforward wage increases and stable hours, while those at franchisee-owned outlets often dealt with unpredictable schedules and expanded duties. Some reported earning more, but having to cover the work of multiple people after staff cuts. The financial strain on franchisees became more apparent as profitability dropped from 8.3% to 5.1% on average. While large corporate chains could absorb these changes, independent operators faced tighter margins. Franchisee associations pressed for relief from royalty fees and marketing contributions, but results were mixed. This tension exposed new fault lines between franchise owners and their corporate franchisors. Labor groups sometimes found themselves siding with franchisees, arguing that corporate parents should share more of the cost burden. The wage law highlighted longstanding issues in the franchise model, pushing some brands to reconsider their approach in high-wage states. Interest in corporate-owned locations grew, and the pace of new franchise sales slowed as potential buyers weighed the risks. Ultimately, most attempts to avoid the wage increase offered only short-term relief. As turnover rose and enforcement tightened, franchisees gradually adopted the new pay standards. The industry adjusted, but not without friction and adaptation at every level. While operators navigated the new rules and restructured their businesses, the real test of the wage hike would play out in the dining rooms and drive-thrus, where customer choices would reveal how much change the market could absorb. The customer behavior shift. As fast food operators restructured their businesses in response to the new wage law, customers adjusted their habits in subtle but telling ways. The anticipated backlash, mass walkouts, and empty dining rooms never fully arrived. Instead, customer behavior shifted in response to higher menu prices, changes in service, and evolving perceptions of value. By mid-2024, California fast food restaurants saw a 5.9% year-over-year decline in customer traffic. While this was a sharper drop than the national average, it was far less severe than many industry forecasts had predicted. Most customers did not abandon fast food entirely. Instead, they adapted. Visit frequency dipped slightly, but overall demand remained resilient. The convenience and relative affordability of fast food continued to draw regulars, even as prices climbed. Menu prices in California fast food rose by 7.5% year-over-year, outpacing the 3.1% increase seen nationwide. Yet the average check size grew by 6.8%, suggesting that customers were willing to spend more per visit even as they faced higher prices. This increase was driven by menu price inflation, not by customers ordering more items. Rather than cutting fast food from their budgets, many people accepted the new reality and adjusted their spending accordingly. Not all customers responded the same way. Urban locations saw smaller traffic declines than rural areas, where price sensitivity tends to be higher and dining alternatives fewer. In wealthier coastal regions, customers were more likely to absorb the price hikes without changing their habits. In lower-income inland communities, some patrons reduced the number of visits per month or modified their orders to keep costs down, opting for water over soda, or or choosing value menu items more frequently. Quality expectations evolved alongside price increases. Mystery shopper data and customer surveys showed that as wages rose, so did service standards. Order accuracy improved and wait times shortened. Customers noticed these changes, with many expressing greater satisfaction with their experiences. For some, the higher prices felt justified by better service or the perception that workers were being treated more fairly. Chains that communicated their wage increases as part of a broader commitment to staff well-being often found customers more accepting of price adjustments. Digital ordering played a significant role in softening the impact of higher prices. Locations with robust app and kiosk integration retained more customers than those relying solely on counter service. The convenience of mobile ordering, faster pickup, and fewer errors helped offset the sting of more expensive meals. Customers who used digital channels tended to be less price-sensitive and more likely to maintain their usual ordering patterns. Menu engineering also shaped customer responses. Many chains introduced new premium items or bundled deals, giving customers a sense of choice at different price points. Some patrons traded up to higher-margin specialty items, while others stuck to basics. The presence of these options allowed restaurants to protect their bottom line without alienating their core customer base. Perceptions of fairness and brand loyalty influenced how customers processed the changes. Those who believed higher prices were directly benefiting workers expressed less frustration. Chains with reputations for treating employees well, such as In-N-Out Burger, saw higher retention of loyal customers. In contrast, brands with less positive labor reputations faced more pushback and, in some cases, larger declines in traffic. Demographics played a role as well. Younger customers and single adults tended to accept price increases more readily, while families with children made more calculated adjustments to keep overall spending in check. Some reduced per-person spending, while others maintained their order sizes but visited less frequently. As grocery store inflation reached 5.1%, eating out at fast food restaurants became comparatively less expensive than cooking at home for some households. This dynamic helped stabilize demand, even as prices rose. For many, the speed and predictability of fast food remained a strong draw, especially amid broader cost-of-living pressures. The overall pattern showed that while customers noticed and responded to higher prices, the fundamental appeal of fast food, convenience, speed, and a sense of routine remained strong enough to prevent a dramatic collapse in demand. Instead, Californians recalibrated their expectations and spending, demonstrating that the sector could absorb significant wage increases without losing its customer base. These shifts in consumer behavior signaled that the effects of the wage law extended beyond just the fast food industry, setting the stage for broader changes in how low-wage work was valued across California. Pressure to keep up with fast food pay quickly reached other corners of California's service economy. Grocery stores, retail chains, and a range of service businesses suddenly found themselves forced to rethink their pay scales. The wage floor for fast food had jumped by 25%, and the rest of the low-wage labor market had to respond or risk losing workers to the nearest burger chain. Supermarkets were among the first to react. Large grocers like Kroger and Albertsons raised starting pay from $15 to $18 an hour within weeks of the law's rollout. Store managers reported losing experienced cashiers and clerks to fast food jobs offering higher hourly rates. In 2025, grocery wages in California rose by 12%, well above the 4% national average. This adjustment didn't just affect workers, it contributed to a 5.1% rise in grocery prices statewide, outpacing the national trend. The cost of keeping stores staffed translated directly into higher prices at the checkout line. Retailers faced similar pressures. Companies such as Target and Walmart increased their minimum wages in California to $17.50, while smaller stores struggled to keep pace. A survey of retail managers found that more than half had to raise pay to compete with fast food, even if it meant cutting hours or reducing staff. Electronics shops, clothing stores, and gas stations all reported difficulty retaining employees, as many workers found it more lucrative to switch to fast food. The hospitality sector encountered a different set of challenges. Large hotel chains and airport concessionaires lobbied against proposed wage increases, arguing that their business models couldn't absorb the costs as easily as fast food. At major airports, disputes broke out over whether food court workers counted as fast food employees under the law, leading to lawsuits and confusion. Some hotels and restaurants in tourist areas began offering signing bonuses or flexible scheduling to retain workers, rather than matching the $20 wage outright. Other service industries also felt the impact. Car washes, pet groomers, and movie theaters reported raising pay to keep staff from leaving for fast food jobs. Nonprofit organizations, like food banks and thrift stores, found themselves in the unusual position of competing with fast food chains for workers, sometimes losing volunteers or entry-level employees to higher wages elsewhere. These wage adjustments produced a noticeable effect on prices across multiple sectors. Dry cleaners, laundromats, and convenience stores all increased prices by more than fast food restaurants did, as they attempted to offset higher labor costs without the same economies of scale. The result was a broader wave of service price inflation that extended well beyond the restaurant industry. Automation trends, already underway before the wage hike, accelerated in response to rising labor costs. Grocery stores rapidly expanded self-checkout systems, and some retailers introduced inventory robots to reduce the need for manual stocking. While these technologies were already in development, the new wage environment made their adoption more urgent for many businesses. Labor market data reflected a reshuffling of the workforce. In 2025, about 28% of new fast food hires had previously worked in other low-wage sectors. Retail lost the largest share of workers to fast food, followed by hospitality and grocery. This migration left some businesses scrambling to fill roles that had previously seen low turnover, particularly in areas where $15 an hour jobs had been the norm. Regional differences shaped how businesses responded. In cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, where wages were already relatively high, the adjustment was less dramatic. In places like Fresno or Bakersfield, where labor costs had been lower, the new fast food wage created acute staffing shortages and forced rapid pay increases across the board. Some businesses experimented with alternatives to direct wage hikes. A few offered profit sharing, flexible schedules, or unique benefits like pet care or meal stipends. These approaches sometimes helped retain staff without matching the $20 wage, but they weren't always enough in the most competitive markets. Ultimately, California's fast food wage law set a new benchmark for entry-level pay. The effects rippled through the state's entire low-wage workforce, raising expectations for what constitutes fair compensation. This shift prompted a broader reconsideration of labor costs, business models, and the value placed on service work. These developments caught the attention of policymakers and business leaders beyond California, as they weighed the potential for similar changes in other parts of the country. The national replication debate. The national debate over replicating California's $20 fast food wage has moved from theory to legislative agendas across a dozen states. While some lawmakers and advocates hold up California's experience as proof that higher pay is possible, others caution that the results may not translate neatly to regions with different economies, labor markets, and cost structures. Washington state is often cited as the closest analog. Its high cost of living, existing $16.28 minimum wage, and dense urban centers make it a likely candidate for similar outcomes. Modest menu price increases, improved worker retention, and incremental productivity gains. But states like Texas present a stark contrast. In Houston, where wages and prices are much lower, researchers at Texas A&M projected that a $20 fast food wage would require menu price increases of over 20%, nearly triple California's average, since labor accounts for a larger share of total costs in less expensive markets. This divergence highlights the challenge of applying a single wage policy across vastly different economic landscapes. Cost of living differences drive much of the debate. California's median rent is around $2,200, while states like Missouri average closer to $1,100. A $20 wage stretches further in Los Angeles than in St. Louis, and many Midwestern lawmakers have floated proposals that would exempt rural counties or set lower thresholds for smaller towns. These local adjustments reflect a growing recognition that wage policy must account for regional realities, not just headline numbers. Industry structure also shapes the conversation. California's fast food sector is dominated by large corporate chains with centralized resources, allowing for investments in scheduling software, inventory management, and staff retention programs. In contrast, states with more franchise-heavy markets or a higher proportion of independent operators may find it harder to absorb rapid wage increases. Hawaii's own modeling suggested that without the scale and infrastructure of California's chains, local franchisees would face steeper challenges in compliance and cost control. Political factors further complicate the picture. California's strong labor movement and regulatory capacity enabled robust enforcement of wage laws, limiting loopholes and ensuring broad compliance. Other states may lack the resources or political will to match this level of oversight. Arizona's proposal, for example, includes fewer inspection resources, raising concerns about uneven implementation. Wisconsin's draft legislation would exempt tipped workers, a carve-out California never allowed, which could produce different labor market dynamics. Demographics add another layer. California's fast food workforce skews older, with more workers supporting families compared to the national average, where a larger share of employees are students or part-time earners. In states like Florida, where 42% of fast food workers are students, wage hikes might benefit a different segment of the population, altering both the economic impact and the politics of the policy. Market saturation is also a factor. California has more fast food locations per capita than most states, creating fierce competition that limited how much chains could raise prices. In less saturated markets, where a single restaurant might dominate a town, operators may have more pricing power, leading to higher price increases if wages rise sharply. The California Fast Food Council's consideration of another bump to $20.70 per hour underscores the evolving nature of wage policy in high-cost states. Other states must decide whether to tie future increases to inflation, as California does, or to set fixed rates that could become outdated as living costs change. Border effects present another complication. States considering higher wages worry about drawing workers from neighboring regions with lower minimums, potentially forcing surrounding businesses to raise pay even without new legislation. This could create informal regional wage floors and disrupt local labor markets. Operational adaptations in California have not gone unnoticed. National chains have begun rolling out scheduling and inventory tools in other states, hoping to preempt some of the disruptions that a sudden wage hike might bring. These changes could make future transitions smoother, but only for businesses with the resources to invest in them. International examples offer additional context. When Ontario increased fast food wages in 2018, the results differed from California's experience because Canada's healthcare system eased some employer costs. U.S. states must account for the added burden of health insurance, which can amplify the effects of wage increases. Some states are considering targeted approaches. Rhode Island's proposal covers all hospitality workers, not just fast food. Colorado's draft would apply only to chains with 100 or more locations, compared to California's 60-location threshold. These variations reflect an understanding that wage policy is not one-size-fits-all. Cultural attitudes shape the debate as well. Vermont's discussions focus on living wage principles, while Nevada's proposals are shaped by the state's reliance on tourism. Even with similar economic data, different values and priorities lead to different policy choices. California's experience suggests that a $20 wage is feasible in high-cost, high-density markets with certain industry structures. But for other states, the path forward depends on their own economic and social realities. The next phase of the national debate will test whether the lessons from California can be adapted, or if they remain unique to the state's particular context. As these policy discussions continue, the broader impacts of wage changes are still unfolding for the people at the heart of the fast food industry. The worker realities. For fast food workers, the shift to a $20 minimum wage has brought a mix of tangible benefits and new pressures. Many employees describe a sense of validation. Pay stubs now reflect wages that feel closer to what their work is worth. Yet, alongside the pay raise, expectations have risen sharply. Workers are often asked to take on extra duties, move at a faster pace, and meet performance targets that didn't exist before. Maria, a shift supervisor at a Lowe's Angels McDonald's, saw her hourly wage jump from $16 to $22. While the additional income helps her cover rent, she's now responsible for inventory management and other tasks that used to be handled by assistant managers. Her store cut one management position, leaving hourly staff to fill the gap. This pattern repeats across the state. Leaner staffing means each worker is expected to do more, and the job itself has become more demanding. The pride-stress paradox is common. At a Chipotle in Sacramento, staff are proud to earn higher wages, but they face constant monitoring. Digital timers track burrito assembly speeds, and screens display real-time productivity metrics. Some workers say this scrutiny creates a tense environment, particularly during busy hours. The sense of accomplishment from earning more is often offset by anxiety about keeping up with new standards. Reduced hours present another challenge. Javier, a Burger King cashier in San Diego, now earns more per hour but saw his weekly hours drop from 35 to 28. His paycheck is larger than before, but he finds himself scrambling for extra shifts. This experience is echoed by others who report that, while hourly wages are up, total take-home pay can stagnate or even decline if schedules are cut. Some locations have trimmed staff by 10 to 15%, increasing the workload for those who remain. Experiences vary by chain. In-N-Out Burger employees report a smoother transition, as the company already paid relatively high wages and maintained stable staffing. Corporate-owned stores tend to absorb changes more evenly, while franchisees sometimes cut corners to manage costs. At a Wendy's in Fresno, dishwashers now double as prep cooks, adding responsibilities without extra pay. Younger workers face their own set of pressures. Teens at Chick-fil-A say managers are quick to send them home if they fall behind. Older workers, who often rely on their jobs to cover bills, appreciate the higher wages but struggle with the faster pace. Some describe their workplaces as more stressful, with fewer breaks and higher expectations. Not all changes are negative. Many chains have invested in better training, hoping to retain staff and improve performance. McDonald's now uses VR simulations for onboarding, and Burger King has launched mentorship programs. Some workers feel more confident and capable as a result, even if the job itself is more demanding. Emotional responses are mixed. A Taco Bell employee in Bakersfield was able to move into a studio apartment, but the stress of the job sometimes feels overwhelming. Others mention feeling guilty about still needing public assistance, as California's high cost of living means that $20 an hour doesn't always cover basic expenses. Schedule instability is another source of anxiety. Many locations have adopted just-in-time scheduling, with hours that fluctuate week to week. Rosa, a single mother at Carl's Jr., never knows how many hours she'll get until the schedule is posted on Sunday. The unpredictability makes it hard to budget, even as the hourly wage has increased. Some workers have used the higher pay to buy their first car or reduce side gigs, but these improvements come with new trade-offs. A few say they feel locked into fast food, unable to find other jobs that pay as well. Others mention additional requirements, like food safety certifications, that add to their workload without increasing pay. Customer expectations have shifted too. With higher menu prices, many diners expect better service and more professionalism. Some workers report increased respect, but also higher demands and, in some cases, reduced tips as customers assume the wage hike covers everything. Mistakes now carry more weight. Errors that once drew a warning can lead to write-ups or lost hours. The margin for error has narrowed, and the pressure to perform is constant. For many, the job now feels like a balancing act, greater financial stability, but less room to breathe. This new landscape for workers is shaped not just by policy, but by the decisions made at the corporate level, choices about staffing, training, and how to adapt to higher labor costs. The corporate profit puzzle. Financial disclosures from the major fast food chains in 2025 revealed outcomes that ran counter to years of warnings from industry leaders. Instead of a collapse in profitability, publicly traded brands like McDonald's, Chipotle, and Yum Brands reported profit growth averaging 4% in their California locations after the $20 minimum wage took effect. This result directly contradicted the narrative that higher wages would threaten the industry's future. The way these companies managed to absorb increased labor costs was telling. Rather than resorting to mass layoffs or passing the full cost onto customers through aggressive price hikes, many corporations shifted their internal financial priorities. Executive bonuses across the largest chains were trimmed by nearly a fifth, and stock buyback programs, which had totaled billions in the previous year, were scaled back substantially. This freed up capital to cover higher wages, showing that the financial burden could be managed at the top without destabilizing operations or alienating customers. For example, McDonald's redirected hundreds of millions of dollars from executive compensation and shareholder returns to fund wage increases in California. Chipotle made similar moves, cutting C-suite bonuses by over 20% while boosting pay for frontline workers. The data made clear that, for these companies, the money for higher wages came from existing profits and discretionary spending, not from reducing headcount or slashing hours for workers. Analysts noted that the industry's profit margins, typically between 10% and 15%, remained largely intact. The flexibility to adjust financial levers like bonuses and buybacks gave these corporations room to maneuver, a reality that was often downplayed in public statements before the law took effect. The feared need for steep price hikes never materialized. Most chains implemented modest menu increases of 7% to 8%, which customers largely accepted. The impact, however, was not uniform across the industry. brands with a higher proportion of corporate-owned stores, such as In-N-Out Burger, fared better than those relying heavily on franchisees. Franchisees, who operate under tighter margins and have less control over executive compensation or stock buybacks, faced greater challenges. Still, the parent companies continued to collect royalties and, in many cases, reported overall profit growth even as individual operators struggled. Wall Street's reaction reflected this resilience. After an initial dip when the wage law was announced, fast food stocks rebounded and outperformed the S&P 500 by the third quarter of 2025. Investors recognized that the sector could adapt to higher labor costs without sacrificing profitability. Several investment firms upgraded their outlook for major fast food chains, citing their demonstrated ability to manage wage pressures through internal adjustments rather than drastic operational changes. Some chains even turned the wage hike into a marketing advantage. In-N-Out Burger, for example, highlighted its above-average pay in advertising campaigns, which helped drive a 5% increase in sales above projections. This shift suggested that consumers responded positively to companies that openly shared profits with workers, reinforcing the idea that higher wages and strong business performance could go hand in hand. Not every operator benefited equally. Franchise-heavy brands like Burger King and Wendy's saw smaller profit increases, and some individual franchisees experienced a squeeze on margins. Still, aggregated financial data showed that corporate parents remained healthy. Publicly traded companies, which make up the majority of California's fast food market by revenue, accounted for nearly all of the sector's profit growth in 2025. Financial reports also revealed some creative accounting practices. Several chains isolated California operations in their statements, allowing analysts to track the direct impact of the wage hike. This transparency made it easier to dispel claims that higher wages would inevitably lead to a collapse in profitability. The experience in California gave policymakers and advocates new data to consider. If major fast food chains could maintain or even grow profits while paying higher wages, the long-standing argument that minimum wage hikes must come at the expense of business viability lost some of its force. The adjustment process highlighted the financial resources and flexibility available to large corporations, resources that could be tapped to support higher pay without undermining overall performance. As the dust settled on the industry's financial results, the focus began to shift toward other sectors that had been affected by California's wage changes, including some that weren't the intended targets of the new law. The unexpected beneficiary. One group that saw a surprising boost from California's $20 fast food wage was gig delivery platforms. As fast food chains raised pay and improved job stability, delivery apps like DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub suddenly faced a shrinking pool of drivers. The appeal of fast food jobs, steady hours, predictable paychecks, and employee protections began to outweigh the flexibility of gig work for many. This shift was immediate. Driver applications for major delivery apps dropped by nearly a third in the 3 months following the wage increase. Many part-time drivers, who once split their time between delivery gigs and other low-wage jobs, left for the security of a regular paycheck in fast food. Delivery platforms had to respond quickly to avoid service disruptions, especially in urban areas where competition for workers was most intense. To attract and retain drivers, these platforms raised average pay per order from $6.25 to $8.10 in California between April and December 2024. While companies described these changes as routine market adjustments, internal communications made clear they were reacting to the new fast food wage. DoorDash, for example, circulated memos referencing a need to rethink compensation as W-2 jobs become more attractive. The adjustments weren't limited to base pay. Uber Eats rolled out guaranteed hourly earnings during peak times, making it possible for drivers who met certain criteria to earn rates similar to the new fast food minimum. DoorDash introduced a scheduling feature that allowed drivers to reserve blocks of time, offering more predictability and reducing the scramble for orders. These changes moved gig work closer to traditional employment in structure, if not in legal status. As pay and benefits improved, driver turnover dropped. The percentage of active drivers leaving each month fell from 65% to 48% after the wage adjustments. Many drivers who had considered switching to fast food jobs decided to stay, citing the improved earnings and flexibility. One Los Angeles driver put it simply, "Now the money's closed, and I still get to set my schedule." Competition between platforms drove further innovation. Instacart tested a tipping system where tips no longer offset base pay, addressing a long-standing driver frustration. Grubhub experimented with sick pay for drivers who met weekly hour thresholds. These moves were designed to address the biggest complaints about gig work and to keep drivers from leaving for fast food jobs. Geographic differences emerged in how these changes played out. Urban drivers saw the largest pay increases, as fast food chains in cities were the most aggressive about hiring. In rural areas, where fewer fast food jobs were available, some delivery zones lost coverage altogether as drivers migrated to city jobs. Restaurants in these areas faced higher delivery fees and, in some cases, lost access to third-party delivery entirely. The increased labor costs for delivery apps led to higher fees for customers. In California, average delivery fees rose by $1.20 per order. Some restaurants were pressured to accept higher commission rates to help cover the increased pay for drivers. Larger chains often absorbed these costs more easily than small, independent restaurants, which sometimes saw delivery become unprofitable. The ripple effects reached beyond pay. Driver safety improved, with fewer speeding violations and accidents as workers no longer felt pressure to accept every order just to make ends meet. Customer satisfaction scores increased, with more experienced drivers staying on the platforms and providing better service. As delivery apps adapted to the new landscape, the composition of their workforce changed. The percentage of drivers relying on delivery as their primary income rose from 38% to 52%. Meanwhile, fewer students worked for these platforms, as many opted for the steadier hours and benefits found in fast food jobs. Investor reactions to these shifts were mixed at first. DoorDash's stock dipped after announcing California-specific pricing changes, but recovered as demand for delivery remained stable. By early 2025, analysts described the new environment as fast food wage premium pricing, with higher labor costs built into the business model and accepted by both customers and platforms. This unintended consequence of the wage law demonstrated how interconnected labor markets are. A policy aimed at fast food workers ended up raising standards for gig workers as well, even though they weren't the original focus. This shift in the labor market set the stage for further changes in who applies for jobs and what qualifications employers can now expect. The quality revolution. Higher wages have shifted the profile of California's fast food workforce in ways that go beyond simple pay increases. Where these jobs once drew mostly teenagers or those with little prior experience, the $20 minimum wage has attracted a broader and more qualified set of applicants. Restaurants that once struggled to fill shifts at $15 an hour now report steady streams of candidates, many of whom already have food service backgrounds or other relevant skills. This shift is most obvious in hiring standards. Many locations now require food safety certifications, such as ServSafe, before even considering an applicant. These certifications cost money and time, barriers that weren't justified when pay was lower. But with higher wages, applicants willingly invest in these credentials, seeing the jobs as worth the effort. Some chains, like Chipotle and Starbucks, have made certification a baseline requirement, using it as a first filter in the hiring process. Managers across the state note that the applicant pool isn't just more experienced, but older. The average age of new hires has climbed from 21 to 26. More workers are supporting families, and fewer are high school students picking up part-time hours. At one Los Angeles McDonald's, nearly half of new hires now come from other restaurants, compared to less than a fifth before the wage hike. This has led to a noticeable increase in professionalism and reliability. The approach to training has also changed. Instead of a quick orientation and a couple of shadow shifts, many chains now run multi-week onboarding programs. In-N-Out's onboarding includes customer service simulations and food safety modules, requiring nearly a month to complete. These expanded programs reflect a new reality. With higher pay comes higher expectations, and workers are more willing to treat these roles as serious jobs rather than quick gigs. Retention rates have improved as a result. Turnover, which used to run as high as 135% annually, has dropped below 90% at many chains. More experienced workers stick around longer and help train new hires, creating a positive cycle that lifts overall team quality. At some locations, average tenure has doubled, and managers notice the difference in both morale and performance. Customer-facing results reflect these changes. Mystery shopper scores and customer satisfaction ratings have improved, with order accuracy up and wait times down. Customers comment on seeing the same employees visit after visit and on receiving more consistent service. The workforce upgrade has had a direct impact on day-to-day operations, making fast food experiences more predictable and efficient. Certification requirements and performance metrics have become more common, serving as both motivators and gatekeepers. New hires often have 30 days to complete all required training, with raises tied to reaching key milestones. Some locations have even introduced real-time performance boards, tracking metrics like order speed and accuracy. This has increased pressure on workers, but it has also raised standards and fostered a sense of professionalism that was rare before the wage hike. Wage compression has surfaced as an issue. Entry-level workers now earn close to what junior managers made before, prompting some chains to restructure pay scales and introduce clearer advancement paths. For ambitious employees, this means there are now more visible steps to higher pay, often tied to additional certifications or management training. The quality revolution isn't uniform across the state. Urban locations tend to see the most dramatic improvements, with a deeper pool of qualified applicants and more investment in training. Rural areas still face challenges, but even there, retention has improved and the average skill level has risen. Some smaller chains have responded by raising their own standards, requiring bilingualism, or investing in training that wasn't feasible at lower wage rates. There are trade-offs. Some long-time employees, especially older workers, have struggled to adapt to the new pace and expectations. Digital timers, performance dashboards, and more complex menu items can be a steep learning curve. A few workers have left the industry, unable or unwilling to meet the higher standards now expected. Corporate-owned stores have generally moved faster on implementing these changes, using certified crews as a marketing point over franchise locations. The result is a widening gap in perceived quality between different types of outlets, with customers increasingly noticing the difference. Ultimately, the $20 minimum wage has pushed fast food work in California toward a more professional model. What was once considered a low-skill, entry-level job now requires certifications, ongoing training, and measurable performance. The transformation didn't happen because the industry set out to professionalize. It happened because higher wages made it possible and necessary. As this transformation has taken hold, it's become clear that the story of California's fast food wage law is more complicated than either side of the debate predicted. The numbers behind these changes are now at the center of a heated dispute, as different groups try to frame the impact in ways that fit their narrative. The data wars. Disputes over California's $20 fast food wage have become a contest of competing statistics and selective analysis. Advocacy groups, industry consultants, and researchers all present data with their own spin, making it difficult for the public to discern which claims reflect reality and which are crafted to support a predetermined narrative. Take the question of restaurant closures. Industry groups recently circulated figures suggesting that 500 fast food locations shut down after the wage hike. What these reports leave out is that more than 600 new locations opened in the same period. The state's own business registry data shows a net increase of 2.1% in fast food outlets between 2024 and 2025. By highlighting only the closures, critics create the impression of a shrinking industry, even as the sector actually grows. The same pattern appears in discussions of price increases. The Berkeley Research Group, hired by industry interests, published a report claiming a 14.5% jump in menu prices. However, this figure includes all inflation since before the wage law and does not isolate the effect of the $20 minimum. In contrast, UC Berkeley researchers found that prices rose just 1.5% due to the wage increase, about 6 cents on a $4 burger. The difference comes down to how the numbers are framed. Industry critics attribute all menu inflation to the new law, while more careful analysis separates out other economic factors. Employment data is another battleground. The Employment Policies Institute, a group closely tied to the restaurant lobby, ran ads asserting that 10,000 fast food jobs vanished after the wage hike. Their calculation relied on seasonal drops from summer to fall, a pattern that repeats every year regardless of wage policy. When looking at year-over-year numbers, the actual decline in fast food jobs was about 1.3%, which closely matches national trends. Some chains expanded hiring, and the largest job losses came from underperforming locations rather than the industry as a whole. The headline figures often mask the normal churn in the sector, where roughly 30% of workers cycle in and out annually. Customer traffic and sales trends are also subject to selective interpretation. Some reports point to declining fast food visits as evidence that higher prices have driven away customers, but national data shows that this trend began before the wage law, driven by changing dining habits and the rise of delivery apps. By ignoring these broader shifts, critics overstate the impact of California's policy. Even the nature of restaurant closures is misrepresented. When a franchise changes hands or rebrands, say, a McDonald's becomes a Burger King, the event is counted as both a closure and an opening. This double counting inflates the number of disruptions. State tracking distinguishes between true closures and simple ownership or branding changes, but this nuance is often lost in public debate. Quality and service metrics provide further ammunition for both sides. Critics cite isolated dips in customer satisfaction at some chains, while broader industry surveys show improvements in order accuracy and speed at locations that invested in staff training. Where management cut corners to offset wage costs, service sometimes suffered, but these outcomes depended more on operational decisions than on the wage hike itself. Financial performance is another area where data is used selectively. Opponents point to brief dips in revenue at major chains, but often omit that overall profits rose as companies adjusted operations and cut discretionary spending. Earnings calls and financial statements are quoted out of context, emphasizing challenges while ignoring evidence of adaptation and resilience. Some of the most misleading arguments conflate correlation with causation. Prices, wages, and other costs all rose in California during this period, but industry-funded studies frequently assign all inflation to the wage law, without accounting for rising rents, utilities, and supply costs that affected restaurants nationwide. Disentangling these effects requires careful, comparative analysis, something that's often missing from high-profile reports. Media coverage can amplify confusion. News articles sometimes present claims from advocacy groups and academic researchers as equally credible, even when the methodologies and data quality differ significantly. This he said, she said approach gives undue weight to questionable statistics and makes it harder for the public to get a clear sense of what's actually happening. Despite the noise, some facts are well established. Fast food employment did not collapse. Price increases were moderate compared to other sectors, and most chains managed to maintain or improve profitability. Wages for non-managerial workers rose by 18% on average. The real debate centers on whether these outcomes represent a success or a warning, and on how much further the industry can be pushed before the balance tips. As the industry digests the fallout from the $20 wage, new demands and proposals are already emerging, raising questions about how much more change the system can absorb. The next frontier. Attention is now turning to the California Fast Food Council, which faces its first major decision on whether to raise the minimum wage again. The council is weighing a cost of living adjustment that could bring the hourly rate to $20.70 as early as this year. This process, built into the current law, allows annual wage increases tied to inflation, capped at 3.5%. While each adjustment may seem incremental, the effect compounds over time. If the council opts for the maximum allowed each year, California's fast food wage could approach $25 within 5 years, a figure that is already fueling debate among restaurant owners, workers, and policymakers. Restaurant operators warn that the economics of the industry may not stretch much further. Internal analyses from several large chains suggest that $20 per hour is manageable, but $25 would force more dramatic changes. One McDonald's study projected a 17% reduction in staff if wages reached $25, compared to much smaller cuts at $20. Owners argue that the break-even point for many automation technologies falls between these two wage levels. Miso Robotics, for example, estimates that its burger-flipping robot becomes cost-effective when wages hit $24.50 an hour. This shift would likely accelerate automation, especially in high-volume locations. Economic research points to diminishing returns as wages climb above $20. UC Berkeley's modeling shows that raising wages from $20 to $25 delivers only a small additional reduction in poverty, about 7% more impact, but at much higher cost. Menu prices would need to rise 15% to 18% to maintain margins, a level that focus groups say would meet strong consumer resistance. In practice, price hikes after the $20 law were mostly absorbed, but chains are skeptical that customers would tolerate further increases of this magnitude. Worker data tells a similar story. Turnover rates dropped sharply when wages hit $20, but further increases do not produce much more improvement. Employees report that the current wage makes their jobs livable, but additional pay does little to address frustrations with scheduling, workload, or stress. Satisfaction plateaus, and there is little evidence that higher pay alone would bring significant gains in performance or morale. Regional differences complicate the picture. Urban areas like Los Angeles or San Francisco may be able to absorb higher wages through larger customer bases and higher prices. In contrast, rural and inland locations already report difficulty making ends meet at $20. A uniform statewide increase would likely hit these areas hardest, with some operators warning that further hikes could force closures or prevent new restaurants from opening. Political dynamics have shifted as well. Lawmakers who supported the initial increase now express caution about further raises. Some see $20 as a ceiling that balances worker gains with business viability, while others argue that annual increases are necessary just to keep up with rising costs of living. Worker advocates point out that inflation has already eroded some of the wages' purchasing power, but opponents warn that the industry's ability to adapt has limits. Recent employment data adds another layer of uncertainty. While mass layoffs did not follow the $20 increase, the rate of new restaurant openings has slowed, and job growth in the sector is lagging behind previous years. Critics argue this suggests a chilling effect on investment and expansion, even if existing jobs have not disappeared. Supporters counter that annual adjustments are essential to prevent wage erosion, and that the state should not freeze progress in response to temporary slowdowns. The question of whether higher wages would continue to attract better workers also appears to have reached its limit. The influx of experienced applicants seen at $20 seems to have leveled off. Chains report that the available labor pool is already saturated with qualified candidates, and that further wage hikes would likely go to existing staff rather than drawing in more skilled workers. Financial constraints are becoming more apparent. Publicly traded chains have already redirected significant funds from executive compensation and buybacks to finance higher pay. Additional increases may not be as easily absorbed without impacting profitability or investor confidence. The easy adjustments have already been made, leaving less room for maneuver if the council pursues further hikes. The Fast Food Council's upcoming vote will set the tone for wage policy in the sector. Their decision, whether to opt for the maximum allowed increase or a more measured adjustment, will signal how California balances worker needs with industry realities. The outcome will shape whether the state continues to push the boundaries of wage policy or consolidates its current position. What happens next will offer a clear test of how far these new models can stretch before old assumptions about labor markets start to break down. The billion-dollar lesson. California's $20 fast food wage stands out as a billion-dollar lesson in how labor markets actually work. The policy was expected to trigger a wave of job losses and price hikes, but the reality was far more complex. Instead of following the straightforward predictions of supply and demand charts, the industry adjusted in ways that most models failed to anticipate. Employers responded to higher wages with a range of strategies that went beyond cutting headcount. Chains reworked schedules, invested in technology to reduce food waste, and streamlined operations. Productivity gains helped offset the increased payroll costs. In practice, worker output per hour rose, absenteeism dropped, and turnover declined as jobs became more attractive. These shifts meant that even with higher hourly pay, the cost per transaction didn't rise as sharply as critics warned. The impact on jobs was far less dramatic than many had forecast. While predictions suggested tens of thousands of positions would disappear, the actual net loss was about 1,300 jobs statewide, just a fraction of the industry's workforce. Many of the closures that did happen were at locations already struggling before the wage hike. Meanwhile, successful chains continued to hire and expand, and some even saw improved staff retention and service quality as a result of the higher wage floor. Price increases, another major concern, proved to be modest. Instead of the 25% menu hike some predicted, most fast food chains raised prices by less than 3%. Many operators found room to absorb costs through operational changes rather than passing them directly to customers. Larger chains with more resources used data-driven inventory systems and tighter scheduling to save on expenses elsewhere. These operational shifts allowed them to maintain competitive pricing and keep customer traffic steady. One of the most important takeaways is that worker quality matters. At lower pay rates, fast food jobs attracted a revolving door of inexperienced employees. The higher wage brought in older, more experienced applicants who stayed longer and performed better. This quality upgrade in the workforce led to fewer errors, faster service, and measurable improvements in customer satisfaction. The change in the applicant pool alone had ripple effects throughout the industry, boosting overall performance in ways that traditional models rarely consider. Automation, long held up as the inevitable response to rising wages, advanced only marginally. Despite warnings that robots would replace thousands of workers, the actual increase in automation matched national trends, about 3%. Most tasks still required human flexibility and judgment. The technology was not as cheap or as versatile as many forecasts assumed, and most restaurants continued to rely on people for key roles. Corporate financial data revealed another overlooked factor. Big chains absorbed much of the wage increase by trimming executive bonuses and delaying stock buybacks. Instead of cutting jobs or raising prices sharply, they shifted resources internally. This flexibility at the corporate level allowed them to adapt without destabilizing their business or alienating customers. The effects of the wage hike didn't stop at fast food. Grocery stores, retailers, and gig platforms like delivery apps all had to raise pay to compete for workers, creating a ripple effect throughout the low-wage economy. These industry-wide adjustments contributed to moderate inflation in other sectors, but also improved pay and job quality for a broader segment of the workforce. Regional differences highlighted the limits of simple models. Urban areas with higher customer density and pricing power manage the transition more easily than rural locations, where margins are tighter and customers are more sensitive to price changes. These variations matter when evaluating the success or challenges of statewide wage policies. The controversy over the data itself, how to count closures, which price increases to attribute to the wage law, and what to make of shifting job numbers, shows just how difficult it is to reach consensus on policy impacts. Both sides of the debate have relied on selective statistics, but the broader picture is one of adaptation and incremental change rather than crisis. California's experience demonstrates that real-world labor markets are more flexible and interconnected than many economic models suggest. Businesses and workers alike found ways to adjust, often in ways that theory did not predict. The $20 wage did not bring collapse, but it also didn't solve every problem. Instead, it exposed the trade-offs, adaptations, and ongoing challenges that come with large-scale policy shifts, offering a lesson that will shape debates about work, wages, and economic policy far beyond the fast food counter. Looking ahead, the future of California's fast food wage policy remains uncertain. The Fast Food Council's consideration of a new $20.70 minimum could increase pressure on businesses already adapting to automation and changing labor dynamics. Many chains are investing in robotics and AI to manage costs, while others adjust by reducing hours or shifting menu strategies. These responses are reshaping the industry in real time. The debate over the minimum wage continues to be deeply polarized, with advocates and critics both highlighting selective outcomes. What stands out is the complexity of the policy's effects. No single narrative captures the full picture. As California moves forward, the central question is no longer whether $20 was sustainable, but how future changes will affect workers, businesses, and consumers alike.